Okay, for this video we're going to have a little bit of a deep dive into the scripts. I've been asked by a couple of people just to explain how the scripts are running through, just at a high level. So the scripts are essentially identical. We're just going to view them on GitLab. The Centos 7 script and the Centos 8 script are almost identical apart from the package manager they use, but the principle is the same for both. So I'll just explain the Centos 8 script for now, and then you can be able to map that back to the Centos 7. A couple of notes on the way through from the README. So the admin password is actually hard-coded into the script for the Splunk web UI. So just make sure you change this before you run the script, or you can go into the Splunk options after and change that too. The script downloads a tar of add-ons. I update these add-ons on a regular basis, but they might become out of date between what's on Splunk base and what's in the system. So if you want to, you can update them afterwards. For Splunk Cloud customers, if you've got Splunk Cloud, you can contact support and they'll give you a Heavy Forwarder license to install on the machine. If you want to have a look at the end of the video for installation of this script, it shows you how to add licenses. If you're on-premise, obviously you need the on-premise license. It is designed to run on a vanilla install, so it takes no care really for existing configurations or customizations you've done on your instance. So it's really meant to be from the first boot of a new installation, as you see in the video. Run through and do the basic installation of Splunk, and then you can do some customization from there. It doesn't watch out for anything that's already there, so just bear that in mind. And the last line there around a golden image, so if you're making a forwarder that you're going to deploy via VMware or some other tool that you're going to have a golden image for, just make sure you run the clone prep command before you make the golden image available in the system. What that does is that removes all the unique identifiers for that particular Splunk instance. If you don't do that, what will happen is you'll get lots of Splunks appearing with the same GUID, the same unique ID, and that will cause problems within the system, especially within an index cluster or the license master and those kind of things. So just make sure if you're going to reuse this image once you've made it, just run this command before you snapshot it to roll out. So if we just go into the Centos 8 script for now. So the script default password is located up here. So when you go to the Splunk UI, that's the password you'll need to use to log in, unless you change it within the script, which is a bit further down. I'll show you shortly. I added some useful commands here. So these are things I find useful while troubleshooting a heavy forwarder. So whether it's looking at the logs that are coming through, looking at the syslog-NG stats, or looking at TCP dump to see if we're actually receiving any events. This one I recommend if you've not got any other management of the events. What it will do is essentially run every day and check the logs folder, and if there's a file that ends in .log, what it will do is it will delete that file if it's older than 1 day. The reason we do this is that you don't have terabytes and terabytes of data stored on the heavy forwarder, which you can do if you want to. Obviously, there's some sort of backup, but I'd recommend adding this to your cron after you've set up the script. The script doesn't do it itself, but it's just there as a note. So the first thing the script does is basically create a couple of users here. So we're going to create the syslog-NG user and the Splunk user. Ideally, obviously, you don't want to run Splunk as root, or because it's a security risk. We don't want anything running as root. Then we're going to create some folders here. So this is where the events are going to go. If you've got some different logs that you want to install, obviously you can add another line here to make the directory for Fortinet or Palo or whatever technology you're using. We're going to make sure that syslog-NG can reach that folder, give it permissions. Then we're going to set the firewall. So first thing the script does, you'll see it basically echoes out the list of existing rules, and then what we do is we add these rules here. So these are the default Splunk ones. Typically you need those every time, so I haven't commented those out. For the syslog listeners, I only open 514. If you're using, for example, the Zscaler system, they need some more ports open. They send multiple streams to a collector to Splunk. So uncomment these, but you can just, you get the pattern here. So it's just to add the port, then the protocol that you want to open, add the ones that you need to customize or not. And then down here, the command to make sure that the OS has reloaded those rules is here. So reload, and then what we do is we list again to make sure that they're applied. So you'll see that when the script runs, you'll see that it echoes out the new configuration. Huge pages here, or transparent huge pages, THP as it's known. This can impact the way that Splunk searches. So these two cat commands basically show you the current status. So they're probably, when you run the script, it'll probably show as always. What this does is this little part here creates a systemd service essentially that runs, and every time you start the system, it's going to echo never into the config for these two files, so that disables the huge pages. Then we reload systemd just to pick up the new configuration, and then we select to start the systemd service, and then we enable it, which means that it will start at every reboot now from here. So if you don't do the enable, then it will only run for that particular time. It won't do it on reboot. And then what we do here is we cat out those two files again just to make sure that they're set to never, basically. We're going to add some custom file limits. So with a forwarder, you typically have lots of files open that are big. So based on the documentation link here, if you wanted to have a deeper read, these are the recommended kind of settings that the Splunk docs recommend at the moment. So what we do is we basically create another config setup here, and we set the limits to non-standard limits to allow the forwarder to have more files open and larger files open. This is the main difference between the two scripts. So you see this is DNF arrays. The other one is yum remove, I think, from memory. So this is just a different package manager, but the process is identical. So what it will do is it will array our syslog and from the system. Then we get it to update the packages. Then we ask it to install nano wget and tcp dump. This command here looks for all the nano configs, the nano rc files that give syntax highlighting within nano. So this just tells nano to start to use them. I find this command useful myself, so I've included it in here. Obviously it's optional. Then we had to add a extended repo here because syslog-NG is not part of the default CentOS repos. So essentially it's power tools we're going to install. This command pulls that down, and this command enables it. This one will install syslog-NG, multitail, and htop, and IP traffic ng, which is a good way to visualize the traffic coming through the machine. Again, these are optional tools that I find useful, but you're welcome not to install them if you've got compliance requirements where you have to have a minimal install, but this is designed to be a bit of a catch-all. Then we get into the syslog-ng config here. So this is actually based off of a blog I read a while back, and I've kind of adapted this and built through the config to work for customers I've been working with. So this essentially just sets what parameters you want syslog-ng to use, then where you want it to listen. So we're going to listen on 514. There's different configs you can do here. You can also set up multiple sources. So this one is source network, and we've asked it to listen on UDP 514, which is your typical syslog port. Then down here you set up a destination, a filter, and then the log. So a log is essentially a combination of the destination and the filters. So a destination, to be honest, is basically just a file path you'll see here. So these are the folders we created higher up in the script. Then we give it some variables to pull in the host name, the year, the month, the day, and then whatever kind of end of the log name you want. Again, this is customizable if you'd like. Then we set the owner and the group here, so we're going to set it to Splunk, so it's syslog-ng, so they can read those. So this is the D, so D for destination for Cisco ASA. This is the D for destination for Fortinet. This is the D for destination for Paolo, and so on down. But all that does is just tell syslog-ng where to put the files. The filters themselves here are how syslog-ng will route the files. Based on the rules you give it, it will route to that particular destination. We combine the two down here. So basically we're just going to give a match. So we're asking it to look for if you find %ASA in the program or ASA in the message, then we're going to class this as a Cisco ASA event. This one, for example, if you find Fortinet, so we're looking for dev equals FG something, then in the program, or the host name, or the dev within the message here, so we're looking in different locations, then it's a Fortinet event. So then what we do down here is we will combine those two together, as I said. So this is where the destination and the filter come together. So if the source is from the network and the filter meets Cisco, the destination needs to be Cisco. If it's come from the network, so UDP 514, and the filter meets Juniper, it needs to go to the destination of Juniper. So these combinations you usually don't edit once you set them up. Where you'll do most of your editing will be around these filters, just to make sure that you're picking up your own host names or your own terms within the logs, and if you add anything custom. There is a catch-all here, so the filter for all, and then we give it a not. So if it's not Cisco, it's not Fortinet, it's not Juniper, or it's not Palo, then it goes into the catch-all destination. And the catch-all up here is this directory, so catch-all. So if you've got events that aren't matching when you first set this up, they'll be automatically dumped into the catch-all folder. The script doesn't tell Splunk to monitor catch-all, just so it doesn't pick up all the rubbish that might be in there. So you'll need to manually check catch-all if you are doing some configuration. These ones tend to work quite well, especially for Fortinet, because they have FG is pretty much their common dev ID. This field is almost present in every event. Other ones will need some tuning likely, especially around host names and that kind of stuff. And this is the location for the listeners. So we'll make a custom file here called listeners for Splunk in the syslog-NG confd folder, and this file is basically echoed into that location. And then syslog-NG, when it starts, will pick that file up and start to listen. Again, similar to huge pages settings in syslog in systemd, we're going to enable and then we're going to start syslog-NG. So syslog-NG is listening. So that's pretty much the end of the syslog-NG part. Now we'll move into Splunk. So we're going to add Splunk here. So we go into the op directory, we make the directory of Splunk. Here we've got some other versions. If you wanted to uncomment these and use a specific version to match what you're running already, you can just uncomment these just as a handy link. But essentially I'll keep these updated to the most latest version of Splunk. Then we untar that file here, so we're going to work on 803 for this one. We untar that into the Splunk directory. We set the permissions, and then here we're going to create a listener. So you'll see at the end of the demonstration when I'm running through the Splunk UI, we've got a listener on 9997 for universal forwarders or other heavyweight forwarders that are passing up if you've got a bigger environment. So this will get Splunk to listen essentially on 9997. So we create the app. Inside the apps directory, we create this folder, and then we echo this into the directory, which will tell Splunk to listen for Splunk TCP, so Splunk traffic specifically from a universal on 9997, and it'll put it into this directory. So you'll see all this on the file system after the script is run, if you want to take a look. Then we need to tell Splunk to listen for all the logs. So we've told syslog-NG to receive the logs and write them to disk. Now we need to tell Splunk to read those files and put them up into Splunk. So we're going to make a directory here, again, within the apps folder in Splunk. We're going to call it syslog-NG monitors. You'll see this again in the UI run through at the end of the first video. Then we create an indexes file here. So if you're going to have a local machine that's ingesting, because we're using custom indexes, we're just going to use this to create them. If you're not going to index locally and use it just as a forwarder, then this config will still be there, but it doesn't particularly matter. It will just be idle there while you forward the events on. But this sets the config and the path of where it needs to be. This configuration sets for the index locations for Splunk. And again, it goes within the syslog-NG monitors and indexes.conf this time. Now we're going to create the tail readers, as they're called. So this is telling Splunk where to monitor. So this is all available in the Splunk docs if you want to read what's happening here. But essentially telling which folder Splunk should monitor, what source types within that. So Palo Alto have some really nice filtering on their add-on. So for everything you set pan log, and then it will work out as it ingests it what type of data it is. We're going to set the index to pan, so we want it to go to the pan index. Disabled equals false, and the host segment equals 5. So what this does, for those that don't know, is it will use the file path segment to specify the host name. So where we've got var log Splunk logs Palo Alto, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Segment 5, which is this one here, will be the host name, and that ties into our syslog-NG configuration because we told it to use the host name within the output of the file name, of the folder name. Sorry. So syslog-NG will create this folder every time it receives an event from a new host. It will make this folder with the host name, and then it will do by the file name .log. So by this, Splunk will use whatever's in this section of the file path to be the host name for these events, and then it will pick up the logs underneath it. So you'll see here that for the ASA, for example, it's actually 6 because we've got some extra file path here, so we want it to pick up this one. So by moving this around, you can specify the host name that Splunk's going to collect and tag to those events, just in case it's not within the events itself. It's quite useful if the events don't contain a host name. So each of these are essentially identical in format. They're just different specifications for different types of data. I won't go through every one, but that goes into the apps folder. Again, syslog-NG monitors, but this file is called inputs.conf because we're specifying the inputs. Now we're going to add the add-ons. So the script reaches out to S3 bucket, essentially pulls down a group of add-ons, so it brings down the Palo Alto add-on and some others. Once it's downloaded it will basically go through each of the tar files. The way that they come down from Splunk base from the App Store, some have different endings in them. So this 3-layer here just basically goes through whether it's a tar-gz, a tar, or a tgz. Then they'll extract that to apps directory. Then we're going to get deployment apps. So if you're using this Heavy forwarder as a deployment server, so to manage other Splunk instances, you can manage the universal forwarders or manage other Heavy forwarders from it. You need some deployment apps to push out to those instances. This brings down some default ones for like the Windows add-on and domain controllers and those kind of things. So again, if you're not doing that, you can comment this out if you want to, but if it's here in case you need it. Identical principle. It's a different batch of apps, but it goes into the deployment apps directory within Splunk is where it extracts it to. Here we set the web UI settings for Splunk. So we're going to basically set the port to 8000. We're going to enable Splunk Web. Just note this is with the default Splunk cert, so it's not massively secure, but it is SSL, which is a bit better than nothing, but it does use the default Splunk certificate. So if you're doing this over the internet, it's not ideal. On a local installation, it's fine, or just for practice, but I'd recommend that you change the certificate in production if you're going to. And this just sets the welcome screen login text under here, so you can customize this if you want it to be something specific. This one goes into a slightly different location, which is system local, not apps, and the file is called web.conf, which is what it's going to place into that folder. Then we're going to start Splunk up here. So we go to op Splunk bin Splunk, and then we're going to enable boot start, which means that every time the machine starts, Splunk will start. But we want it to start under the user of Splunk. This is the OS user, not the Splunk user. We're going to accept the license to save having to click. We're going to seed the password, which as you see is the same as in the top of the script. This is where you need to change it if you want to use a custom password, so just remove this and put in your own password. We're going to accept terms, we're going to use automatic ports, and we're going to use no prompt here. So this is not going to prompt us, it's just basically an unattended installation is the idea of this line. Once that's all set, then we're going to start Splunk up, so we use bin Splunk start. Then we have the little celebration banner at the end here, just with where to find Splunk. Then we do a quick curl command. This basically reaches out to where Splunk should be, and you should see some HTML essentially from Splunk underneath. If you don't, then Splunk Web's not running. And then down here we've got some example events. So these are the ones that end up being collected initially by Splunk. So when multi-tail runs just afterwards, you'll see that I've got some catch-all events and some Fortinet events in that UI. That's basically these events that have been picked up. So we know that syslog-NG has received them and written them to disk because we're going to monitor that file path. And that's a really easy way to make sure the script works. And down at the bottom here, just a reminder around to clear the config if you're going to clone this machine out to other systems. So that's a quick run through of the script. If you've got any questions or comments or improvements, feel free to submit them on GitLab. It's all very welcome.